Contemporary approaches to risk assessment. ഒരു റിസ്ക് അസസ് ചെയ്യാനുള്ള കണ്ടംപററി അപ്രോച്ചസ് എന്തൊക്കെയാണ് എന്നാണ് ഈ വീഡിയോയിൽ നമ്മൾ പഠിക്കാൻ പോകുന്നത്. So first one is multi-hazard, then multi-sectoral, multi-level, multi-stakeholder, multi-phase, qualitative methods, semi-quantitative methods, quantitative methods. So these are the different methods or approaches to assess risk. So the first one is multi-hazard approach. So in this approach, we consider an area. So in that area, many hazards can occur. And impact of each hazard on that area will be different. And also, the magnitude of these hazards will be different. So consider all these aspects. We are assessing a risk, then such approach is known as multi-hazard approach. The next is multi-sectoral. So here in this approach of risk assessment, we consider different types of elements at risk and the impact of hazard on these elements. Okay. Next is multi-level approach of risk assessment. So in multi-level approach, we consider different levels such as national, regional, district, local, etc. And then we observe how these levels contribute to the increase or decreasing of the risk, and also the strength and weaknesses of these levels in dealing with risk, and also the resources available at different levels to reduce risk. Okay, that is all about multi-level approach of risk assessment. Next is multi-stakeholder. So different stakeholders are involved in risk assessment such as individuals, business, organizations, authorities, etc. Next is multi-phase. Risk assessment can be carried out in different phases such as response. So what do you mean by response? So after a hazard occurs, we have to respond to it. So what all measures we are taken to respond to that hazard, that is known as response. Next is recovery. Recovery means to recover from a hazard. Mitigation means taking certain measures to reduce the damages caused by a hazard, and these mitigative measures have to be taken prior to the hazard. Preparedness. Preparedness means we are preparing for a hazard which can be occur in future. So these are the different phases in multi-phase approach of risk assessment. Next is qualitative method. So we use qualitative method when it is not possible to estimate the magnitude of a hazard, and also it is not possible to express the probability of occurrence of a hazard. So under these circumstances, we go for qualitative method of risk assessment. There we categorize risk into high, moderate and low. And this approach of risk assessment, that is qualitative method of risk assessment, has widespread application in vulnerability assessment using participatory methodology. We already discussed this in last video. Next is in qualitative method, the result is shown in the form of a risk matrix. Okay, and this risk matrix is a graph with x-axis potential loss and y-axis probability of an event occurring. So here the probability of event occurring as well as potential loss is categorized into low, medium and high. So this is an example of risk matrix. See, in x-axis there is potential loss, and y-axis it is probability of occurrence, and both potential loss and probability is categorized into low, medium, high and very high. So here the based on the potential loss. So here the potential loss is categorized based on the account of elements at risk, Such elements at risk are fatalities, injuries, impact on facilities, critical services and infrastructure, property damage, business interruption, environmental or economic impact, etc. So, next is probability of occurrence. So, probability of occurrence is categorized into high, medium, low, very low. So, there the high means events that occurs more frequently than once in 10 years. Moderate means events that occurs from once in 10 years to once in 100 years. Low events that occurs from once in 100 years to once in 1000 years. Very low events that occur less frequently than once in 1000 years. So, based on this, probability of occurrence is categorized into high, moderate, low, very low. Next is risk level. So, risk level is also categorized into A, B, C, D, where A is very low and B is high, C is moderate and D is low. So, this is all about risk metrics. Okay. So, here risk metrics is used for assessing the risk qualitatively. Okay. Next is potential hazards. So, these are the examples of some potential hazards. So, after qualitative approach of risk assessment and after preparing risk metrics, we prepare a risk assessment matrix. So, in risk assessment matrix, so this is in the form of a table, and here the first column will be hazard. So, in that column we will write these hazards, these potential hazards in the first column, and the second column hazard likelihood. So, it should be in between 0 low to 5 high. It should be a number, okay, which ranges from 0 to 5. And hazard likelihood, that is 1 is very low, 2 low, 3 medium, 4 high, 5 very high. And C, this third column is impact severity. So, the impact of these potential hazard, and it should be based on vulnerabilities it causes or the resources which it affects, etc. And it should also be numbered from 0 to 5, where 0 is low and 5 is high. And next D is risk score. So, for obtaining risk score, we have to multiply the second column, third column and the fifth column. Okay. So, then we got a risk score, and the risk score will be also a number range. If it is 1 to 3 very low, 4 to 8 low, 9 to 14 medium, 15 to 19 high, 20 to 25 it's very high. Next is priority. So, priority means we have to convert our risk score into priority score. So, the priority score also should be, if it is 3 it is low, 2 is medium and 1 is high. Okay. So, this is the priority level description according to the risk score. So, after doing this qualitative approach, the final result for risk assessment should be in the form of this risk assessment matrix. Next is semi-quantitative approach for risk assessment. So, here also in semi-quantitative method, the risk is assessed or represented in the form of risk indices, and it is risk indices means numerical values and it ranges from 0 to 1. So, the main difference between the qualitative methods which we explained earlier and the semi-quantitative approach is that, so in qualitative method of risk assessment, we express risk in qualitatively, and in quantitative method we express quantitatively in form of numbers like risk indices. Okay. And semi-quantitative method is used under these situations. First is as an initial screening process to identify hazard and risk. Second one, when the level of risk does not justify the time and effort. Third one, where the possibility of obtaining numerical data is limited. The semi-quantitative approach could be adopted to cover larger areas. Semi-quantitative risk can also be conceptualized as risk is equal to hazard into vulnerability or capacity. It allows incorporating multidimensional aspects of vulnerability and capacity. Okay. അതായത് റിസ്കിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഇക്വേഷനാണ് ഹസാർഡ് ഇൻറ്റു വൾണറബിലിറ്റി ബൈ കപ്പാസിറ്റി. സോ യൂസിങ് ദിസ് ഇക്വേഷൻ വി ക്യാൻ കൺസെപ്റ്റലൈസ് സെമി ക്വാണ്ടിറ്റേറ്റീവ് അപ്രോച്ച് ഓഫ് റിസ്ക് അസസ്മെൻറ്റ്. Next, last approach is quantitative method. In quantitative method, so we expressed risk in terms of this equation. Risk is equal to hazard into vulnerability into amount of elements at risk. So we consider elements at risk, different elements at risk, okay. And here the hazard means the potential probable occurrence or potential occurrence of an hazard. Here the term hazard indicates occurrence of a hazard, and here the vulnerability indicates physical vulnerability to the elements at risk, okay. So that's all about risk assessment approaches. And the next is, after assessing the risk, how we can express the risk. So we can express the risk either qualitatively or quantitatively. In qualitative expressing, it is based on relative risk classes. Here qualitatively we can categorize risk into high, moderate, low, etc. And in semi-quantitative means based on relative ranking. Semi-quantitative, I already explained that here the risk is expressed in terms of risk indices, okay. Then next is quantitative method of expressing risk. First is probability. So probability means occurrence of risk over a particular time period and should be ranges from 0 to 1. Next is economic risk. Economic risk is expressed as PML, AAL and LEC. PML means probable maximum loss, means 1 in 1000 years, okay. So when we consider 1000 years and the loss occurs and the amount of risk occurs will be a particular year when we consider this 1000 years, like that. That is known as PML. AAL means average annual loss. When we consider an year, so in which period of that year the loss is high or the risk is high. Next is loss exceedance curve. So here the risk is expressed in form of a graph. Next is population risk. So here in population risk, how this risk will affect the population as a whole. So if we consider as a whole, we can consider a societal risk. If we consider a single, we can consider it as individual risk. So these are the different ways of expressing risk.